So it's just 11 o'clock. I know people are still joining us, but we've got a full agenda. So I'll just get started with some of the housekeeping things, and then we can get started here. So first of all, welcome and thank you for joining. We're so glad to have everyone here with us. We had a really great response to this event, so thank you very much. My name is Helen Meyer, and I'm the Development Director at Pine Tree Legal Assistance, and I have the great pleasure of emceeing our conversation today. Our goal for today is to share with you the needs that we're seeing in the community and also talk a little bit about what Pine Tree is doing to respond to those needs. We're expecting quite a crowd and we'll have a lot of information, so as I said, we are going to go ahead and get started. We are asking all participants to stay muted throughout the presentation and to use the chat window to ask questions. Julia Dornbush is going to be monitoring the chat throughout the event and will ask, will interrupt, and we've also got time at the end set aside for questions. We're also recording the presentation, so if anyone wasn't able to make it or if you wanted to share it with somebody that you know, we'll be sending it out by email and also posting it on our Facebook page, so you feel free to look out for that. We have quite a crowd today, so we're going to do our best to answer everyone's questions, and so we'll let you know if we can't get to your question. We'll also hopefully do a few more of these events on different topics, so if you have a question that we can't cover today, maybe we could cover it in more detail later on. At the end of the conversation, we'll be raffling off a bag of coffee from Coffee by Design, or tea for people who don't want coffee. You don't have to be present to win. I will follow up by email with the winner afterwards, so if you have to step off a little early, that's no problem. You can still win the raffle. So for people who've just joined, just a reminder, we are going to keep people on mute for this conversation, and we're asking people to use the chat to ask questions and also to introduce yourself. So on the registration form, we asked you to share with us what issues you're most concerned about. Nearly 70% of people who are here today responded that housing and homelessness are their top concerns. And we're definitely going to talk a lot about what we're seeing for our client population and also what trends we're expecting the next few months. About 50% also listed unemployment as an issue, and so we'll be talking about that as well. Our agenda for today includes 4 fabulous members from Pine Tree's team. First, we have our intake manager, Maureen Boston, who will talk about the needs we're seeing in the community and how our service model has adapted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, Jack Haycock, our client-focused technology innovator, will talk about our client education materials and our online resources, which, as you can imagine, are in really high demand right now. Then Katie Childs, the managing attorney of our Augusta office, will talk specifically about housing issues, what we're seeing now, and what trends we expect to see in the coming months. And then finally, Nan Heald, our executive director, will share how our program as a whole is adapting during this difficult time. We'll be trying to answer questions that you've submitted in advance throughout the presentation, and we'll also be taking questions throughout. So just as a reminder, use the chat function to ask your questions, and please stay muted. And without further ado, we can get started, and I'll turn it over to Maureen. Thank you, Maureen.
Sorry, I think I just need to fix my things. There we go, here I am. Hi, everyone. I did really want to thank everyone for being here today. You know, I'm really grateful to be able to have this sense of community and support during this time in which we're all so isolated. So it's really great for all of you to join us today. I'm the intake manager at Pine Tree Legal, as Helen said, and one of my primary roles at Pine Tree is to supervise the triaging of cases that are coming in, requests for legal help that we get. So I'm helping to decide which cases we're going to pass on to our local office for representation, and then helping to provide advice to the people whose cases we're not able to provide further representation to. Normally what that looks like is that we have 3 call center shifts a week, which is our phone intake line, where our paralegals all over the state are logged in and taking phone calls. We also normally have 2 walk-in shifts at every of our 6 offices, so people who want to come in and speak with someone in person can. Our practice has always involved a lot of in-person contact with clients. We're helping them with intimate issues that they're having in their lives, and it involves a lot of interaction. But as you all know, in March, that changed really suddenly for all of us, like it did for the rest of the world. But I'm really happy to say that I think Pine Tree has adapted quite efficiently to this new necessary way of life. On March 10th, I asked one of our paralegals to try out our phone system from his house to see how it worked remotely, because we, like the rest of the state, had this vague idea that we might need to work from home for just a little while. 10 days later, all of our paralegals were working remotely from home, and we've been doing so for the past 9 weeks. We're not holding walk-in hours, but we have expanded our call-in time. So now instead of having 3 shifts that people can reach us on the phones, they're now able to reach us on 4 shifts. We added an additional shift on Friday mornings. I have to say, it's been really wonderful to work with our staff during this time. As challenging and complicated as it's been, people have been putting a lot of effort into making things work. And I think we pretty quickly have been able to provide very similar services to our clients as we are able to from our offices. So we're being able to answer phones in the same exact way as we can when we're sitting at our desk. I have been asked a few times in the past 2 months if the courts are closed. What is Pine Tree Legal doing? And the answer really is there's a lot happening. Times of emergency like this, economic downturns are really devastating to people living with low incomes, and the situation is already forcing more people into poverty than we had before this all started. Helen, did you want to do the poll?
Yeah, that's great. We'll
Okay.
start with the poll. It should pop up on your screen. And we just wanted to sort of get a sense, sort of test knowledge about our eligibility. So go ahead and fill out the poll, and then we'll share the responses. We'll just give people a few more seconds. I can see those responses are coming in.
All right. Well, thank you all for providing responses there. And so the first couple questions, as you might be able to tell, revolve around poverty. And that's a word that I just used myself a few moments ago. But when I talk about poverty, I'm always tempted to put it in quotes and say poverty. Because as many of you probably know, the federal government decides each year what the poverty line is and what the federal poverty guidelines are. But the reality is that that level of poverty that they're talking about doesn't really represent the full picture of how many people there are out there in our communities who are struggling to make ends meet. The government determination certainly controls eligibility for a lot of programs, including our own, which is why we pay attention to them. And I think it's good to know when the government uses that word, when we're talking about eligibility, what it means. So that first question on the poll was, what does the federal government consider to be the poverty line for a family of 4? And I think thank you. Someone shared the answers to us. And so the majority has the right answer on this in our group. And so the right answer is 26,200, which for the record is one adult in the household working full-time, making $12.60 an hour. And I think we all know that there's a lot more people than people making a lot more money than that are making, having trouble making ends meet. And that's whether they're in Manhattan or even in Skowhegan, Maine. It takes a lot more to have a comfortable life and to be able to live with some certainty month to month that you're going to be able to pay your bills. Which is why I think when we talk about the current situation and how it's affecting low-income people in Maine, it's important for us not to just think about those people that are living below the federal poverty line, but also think about people who are making more than that, but also really need assistance and are struggling to make ends meet. Which brings us to the next question, which is how many families in Maine were living below 200% of the poverty line in 2019. And so the answer to that question is actually 28.5%. So in 2019, before the current crisis started, 28.5% of the households in Maine were living under 200% of the poverty level. And as I'm sure everyone realizes, that number is almost certainly gone up considerably, considering the high rate of job loss that has occurred over the past 2 months during this crisis. So getting back to what we're doing at Pine Tree, the reality is there is a national trend of fewer requests for help from legal aid. And I think this is a direct effect of a couple things. One, there are a number of federal and state moratoriums that are slowing things down in the legal process. The courts are closed somewhat, which is also affecting the need. And there are also many wonderful people out there in society who are doing the right thing and being kind. And so that certainly affects the number of people that are looking for legal help. But the flip side of that is that our phone lines remain active. And there are a number of common themes of calls that we're getting repeatedly over the past 2 months. We continue to do intakes. We continue to go to give legal advice, to represent people in court and in administrative processes. And I would like to share a few of those common themes with you today. So first, the answer to our final question on the survey is also the majority got it right this time, but housing is the number one area that we've seen requests for help with over the past couple months. But I think that the people who said unemployment also have good ideas, because we've also seen a drastic increase in the number of calls received for help with employment issues in the past couple months than we normally do at Pine Tree. So in terms of housing, the specific issues we're seeing are that people, despite the fact that the courts aren't holding eviction hearings, people continue to get eviction notices. Many because of the inability to pay rent due to job loss, but also because many landlords out there are acting as they normally do, and they decided that they were done with this tenant this spring, and so they're going to continue on that path, even though things have been very crazy lately for most people in society. In the beginning of the quarantine, we saw a definite increase in the number of illegal eviction cases. We saw people who are getting locked out, people who are getting their utilities shut off. When the courts stopped hearing evictions, you know, some landlords still wanted to force tenants out, and so they did turn to illegal means, and our attorneys were able to take a number of those cases and secure court orders allowing people back into their homes. It slowed down a little in more recent times, but we continue to hear about the threats for illegal eviction and some illegal evictions also. We've also seen an increase in requests for help with unsafe housing conditions, including things like bed bugs, structural issues in apartments that aren't being addressed or fixed as they need to be and as the law really requires. I personally have developed a passion for this issue of who tenants are required to allow into their units during this time of quarantine. Every day our phone lines have been open. We've received calls from tenants who are being told by their landlords that the landlord or a real estate agent or a prospective buyer is going to come into their homes. And I think this is an especially alarming issue due to the current need to quarantine. The people I've spoken with have also largely had particular health concerns, newborn babies, chronic respiratory diseases, terminal illnesses, that are really very legitimate reasons for not wanting strangers into their homes during this time. We've also been fielding lots of calls about job loss. We are helping to answer questions and provide guidance to people attempting to navigate the Unemployment Insurance Commission, system, which is definitely overburdened at this time and also fairly confusing due to the increase in changes in the law and the constant new procedures that they've had to implement. We've also been hearing other employment questions, the question of what protections are required for COVID-19 and what employers can require you to do or not require you to do, or certainly things that are weighing on many low-wage workers in Maine. We continue to help folks with public benefits denials and terminations in programs like TANF and general assistance and food stamps and Maine Care. We are available to answer questions about foreclosure and forbearance options for homeowners who also, obviously not just tenants, but homeowners are facing issues with the economy at this time. We continue to serve the special populations who are particularly vulnerable during the state of emergency, including Maine's tribal members, veterans, migrant farm workers, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as helping parents and students navigate their education rights in this time of remote learning. I'm grateful to be able to say right now that our current staff is able to handle the volume of calls that we're getting, but we're anticipating that it won't last forever, that the needs will increase as businesses reopen and the courts open back up, that there's going to be more and more people calling us and asking us for help. We expect the financial consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic to outlast when the health crisis is resolved. And the financial crisis will continue to force people into poverty and create civil legal needs for Pine Tree to assist with for the foreseeable future. And just in closing, we greatly appreciate your support in helping us be able to rise to meet up with those needs. I'll let our hosts here control the question process, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have about the services we're providing.
Great, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Maureen. It looks like we did just have one question, and the question, Maureen, is there a reporting line for tenants to file complaints against landlords who attempt to commit commercial sexual exploitation, for example, requests for sexual favors in lieu of rent?
So there's not a specific reporting line for that issue in particular, but that is certainly the type of case that Pine Tree would be happy to talk to someone about. We have a fair housing grant, a housing discrimination grant, which sexual harassment of tenants is a legal issue that falls under that umbrella. And we're available to talk to people about the issues and to help walk them through the steps they can take to protect themselves, but also do represent people in cases in front of the Maine Human Rights Commission regarding this issue, as well as the more specific sexual assault legal issues that might arise and the need for a protection from abuse order or something along those lines. Those are services that we can provide at Pine Tree. So anyone who knows anyone dealing with that issue, I would really encourage them to call our normal intake line because we are happy to help with that issue.
And I would just add to that our fair housing attorney, Patricia Ender, has actually been working on cases like those and has actually had a great victory last week. The case is still ongoing, but it was a case in which the landlord was sexually harassing the tenants. So I think at this point, we'll turn it over to Jack Haycock to talk about our client education materials and our online resources. Thanks, Jack.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So as Helen mentioned, my name is Jack Haycock. I am our client-focused technology innovator, which is a really very fancy way of saying that I work on our websites. So PTLA has several websites. Our main one, which I'll be primarily talking about today, is ptla.org. But we also Pine Tree has a long history of having a very strong web presence. Pine Tree Legal Assistance was actually one of the first legal aid programs in the country to begin providing education and empowerment materials for the public, for clients, way back before Google even existed. So now, as you can imagine, with the pandemic and with so many more people having to look into government programs, unemployment, a lot of questions coming up, a lot of information flying at people, and honestly changing very, very rapidly. So our websites have been really key in our response to this crisis. So before I launch into some of the details of what we've been up to on the website and how people are engaging with the website now in ways that they may not have been before, we do have another little poll about how people are using our website. So humor us and take your best shot at these. The results are tallying in there. All right. So our first question is really thinking about kind of the volume of our response since this crisis emerged. So Pine Tree, as you probably just learned from Maureen, we work in a broad variety of areas addressing civil legal needs. And so since the beginning of March, when things really started getting serious here, we have actually, our staff have created 19 uh, separate standalone resources to address various aspects of the COVID-19 crisis. And that includes right now, and this total is changing literally daily. Right now we have 18 standalone pieces of COVID-19 related information on ptla.org. And we also have a 14 section COVID-19 response and resource page on statesidelegal.org, which is a national website that Pine Tree Legal Assistance operates that provides information and resources for people with military service and their families. So we're not only responding to the needs of people within the state of Maine, but we're actually also keeping track of and responding with resources for veteran service members with military experience nationwide. So it's been a very busy spring here on the website front at PTLA, and it really has been a full staff effort. Our staff have really stepped up incredibly. Even though I run the websites, it would be more than a Herculean task for one person to try to stay on top of all of the updates in all of the legal practice areas that we work in. So our staff have been instrumental in making sure that those updates happen, and making sure that we have the best possible and most up-to-date information available for the public on the website. And really the best example of that in kind of an odd place that I can give is especially around issuing of stimulus checks. The IRS really had at least 1 week where every day they were issuing somewhat complex answers to questions that people had about the program or rules about how to get your direct deposit information uploaded with the IRS. And so daily they were updating and changing that information. And I worked with Helen Hall, who is our wonderful low-income taxpayer clinic attorney, and another staff member of ours, Jade Richardson, who actually normally works in family law, but is stepping up in this too, to make sure that we turned those updates around quickly and got them up on the website, even if it meant we were updating information from the IRS literally every day for a week. And that continues to be the case in many of the areas as things emerge. So our next question is, which legal topic is most popular among our COVID-19 resources that we've developed? And I'm sorry, I've been a little mean to you because this was a bit of a trick question. So of the pages that we have developed specifically for COVID-19 in response to this crisis, your instincts were right. Our rental housing and COVID-19 frequently asked questions page has been our most popular of those resources. And in addition to being popular, it's not just getting a lot of people looking at it. It actually, users are spending about 35% more time looking at that page than they do on average pages on our website. And so what that means is people are really engaging with this. They're really digging in. They're staying on the page and reading through the resources. So I said this was a little bit of a trick question, and that's because even though that has been the most popular of our COVID resources, we've seen the biggest traffic spike overall among our unemployment materials. And by that, I mean materials that we already had on the website that we have now since added COVID-19 specific information to. But those kind of immediately shot up in early March, and that has been the largest increase in traffic that we've seen. In fact, an example of that is we have a resource called "Do I Have to Repay Unemployment Benefits If I'm Overpaid?" So we've added COVID-specific updates to that. But on March 2nd, which is any routine day before this crisis started, that page had 135 page views. But by April 22nd, it had 3,015 page views just that day. And that's a 2,133% increase in traffic just in that very short time, just on that one page. So it's been a little uneven, but certain of our resources like this, where suddenly there is an enormous population needing information about unemployment that maybe didn't need it the day before or wouldn't have needed it if not this crisis. And so the final question, how many users have accessed ptla.org since March 15th, 2020? And I will preface this by saying, normally we have a very popular website. It's not unusual for us to see between 10,000 and 15,000 users on our website in a week on any normal given week. And since March 15th, we've actually had 200,000, okay, wait, let me get my numbers right here. 222,990. So that's a pretty enormous bump. We're now seeing about 30,000 visitors to just ptla.org every week. And so what does this mean? What are some of these things? So of those users, of those visitors that we're getting, 91% of them are new users. So what that means is it's not just the same people who are returning to the website again and again. 9% of users are that. So that will be people like PTLA staff in other social service agencies, perhaps government agencies, but 91% of people who are coming are new people every day. And so we're reaching a pretty vast number of people with these resources. And that's really, providing this information is always really important. It's always important that people have access to accurate legal information that is available to them in a format that they can read. And especially now, when there is so much confusion and so much crisis, to be able to have a website with easy to understand, accurate information that people actually use that's really been our goal, and I think our entire staff has come to achieve. So that wraps it up for me. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you, Jack. That was wonderful. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, so I think we'll turn it over to Katie Childs, but people can certainly enter a question in the chat and we'll come back to it at the end of the program. Thanks, Jack, and thank you, Katie.
Hi, everyone. As Helen said, my name's Katie Childs. I am an attorney in Pine Tree's Augusta office, and I will be talking about the current state of evictions in Maine and some of the protections that tenants have. A large portion of Pine Tree's practice does involve representing tenants with rental housing issues, including evictions. The eviction process involves a few different stages, which I'll briefly explain. So the first stage is a notice to quit. So the landlord will give the tenant a notice to quit to start the process of termination of the tenancy. The second stage is the commencement of an eviction action in district court. The third stage is the court proceeding itself, and if a judgment issues in favor of the landlord, the court will then issue what's called a writ of possession. And the writ of possession is the actual court order that the landlord has to have served on the tenant, which extinguishes their legal right to possess that property. So once the writ is served on the tenant, it starts a 48-hour clock, after which the tenant no longer has the legal right to possess the property and will be considered a criminal trespasser. Right now, as we've mentioned, the courts are closed for many types of cases. So those cases aren't being scheduled, and that includes evictions until at least May 31st. The governor also issued an executive order which strictly limits landlords' ability to obtain writs of possession in eviction cases that happened before the current state of emergency and where the judgment had entered in favor of the landlord. So in addition to limiting the issuance of writs of possession, the governor's order also extends the notice to quit period, so that first stage of the eviction process, in certain types of cases. So for a tenant at will or someone who doesn't have a lease agreement, what the law says is that they can be given a 7-day notice to quit for non-payment of rent and a 30-day notice to quit for a no-cause eviction. And the governor's order extends that 7-day period to 30 days and the 30-day no-cause period to 60 days. There are some additional protections under the CARES Act for tenants in certain types of properties. This includes many federally subsidized properties and properties with federally backed mortgages. The CARES Act implements a 120-day moratorium on notices of eviction for non-payment of rent, and also the accrual of late fees for those certain types of properties. There's also borrower relief for homeowners under the CARES Act, which entitle homeowners to up to 12 months of forbearance for federally backed loans. The CARES Act also suspends the initiation or completion of foreclosure actions until May 19th. But again, this only applies to federally backed mortgage loans. And then there's the state court pandemic management order, which provides that foreclosure hearings and mediations also won't be scheduled until June 1st of this year. As Maureen had mentioned earlier, since the outbreak, we have seen certain types of housing cases increase. Illegal evictions, which Maureen mentioned, where a landlord doesn't take the tenant to court and instead will shut off utilities, their water, electricity, or lock the tenant out without first going to court. We have also had clients who have actually been served with writs of possession despite the stay-at-home order, and even since the governor's executive order saying that in most instances landlords cannot serve writs of possession. And in those cases, we have filed motions to ask the court to stop the enforcement of the writ of possession so that the tenants aren't forced to move during the current pandemic. And also, as Maureen had mentioned, we have had an increase in tenants calling us because they're concerned about having the landlord ask to come into their unit for an inspection or for whatever reason, but they're also concerned about the implications of denying access to the landlord. In the coming months, we expect to be very busy once the courts reopen. There will, of course, be a backlog of eviction cases that will need to be heard. And at Pine Tree, we're strategizing about how we can best make use of the resources that we have to cover as many of the eviction dockets as we can. even though the courts are closed right now, landlords are still issuing notices to quit, that first step in the eviction process, and rent is still due at this time. So there haven't been any changes to the law that cancel or forgive rent obligations. So tenants can and should call us for help, so that we can give them advice about their particular situation and give them information about what they can expect when the courts do reopen. And also, as Maureen had mentioned, we're still taking calls and taking new cases. And so we encourage tenants who have questions to contact us. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate that. That was great. So everyone, please go ahead and put your questions in the group chat. Katie, we have one question for you. How is the $500 assistance fund working out for back rent?
I wonder if Maureen has more information. I haven't had clients directly who have had any issues with that $500 assistance fund, but I suspect we've had callers on intake.
We actually haven't. We've gotten a couple calls from people with questions about it, and have been in touch a little bit with Maine State Housing, who's administrating the program. And it seems like they are, things are going smoothly with how the program is being administered. I think one of the drawbacks to the program is it's really a limited amount of assistance. So we're not seeing it really have, we're not hearing from a lot of people for which the $500 is going to make or break their eviction situation, I think, which might influence why we're not talking about it so much. But because I'm sure, as most people can realize, the $500 is not enough to cover a month's rent in most places in Maine, and it's also just a one-time program. So, but my understanding is that they're processing applications and they're giving out money, and we haven't been hearing from people who are thinking they were unreasonably denied the assistance.
Thank you, Maureen. So I think we'll turn it over to Nan Heald now. And if people have more questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will come back to them after we hear from Nan.
Hi, everybody. I am going to gallop through some of the changes that we have seen at Pine Tree over the last couple of months, which some of my colleagues have already referenced. We started out by closing our office to the public on the week of March 16th. And we stopped doing outreach with agencies and community partners around the state that same week. But we did tell all of our community partners to encourage people to reach out to us for phone. And we made a special effort to make sure that people knew we were still here, even if we were not meeting people in person. As Maureen mentioned, we also modified our phone system so that staff could take calls even from home. On March 23rd, we switched to working from home. And the way we managed that was to have one person in each office who agreed to be the essential person to handle incoming and outgoing mail and deliveries at their local office. And obviously the courts changed the way they do business. So we started figuring out how we could respond to those changes appropriately. In early April, the new congressional federal opportunities changed with the CARES Act. We were really lucky to get support from Bangor Savings Bank to do an application for the Payday Protection Program, which we submitted at midnight when the online portal opened, and we were fortunate to have that approved 2 days later. We also, with thanks to Helen Meyer, our wonderful development director, were able to submit with 5 days notice an application to the Legal Services Corporation for new funding for technology related to working from home. We updated our leave policies to correspond with the new changes in federal law, and continue to support our staff in their work from home efforts. We have board meetings 5 times a year. We had our April board meeting by Zoom, which was an education for all of us, and we had really amazing participation in that. Almost 90% of all of our board members were able to join. And we've been really lucky to have the board so engaged and focused on our work throughout this period of time. Jack talked about how other staff stepped up to help with client education. That was part of a deliberate effort to anticipate that with the reduced need for staff to go to court, our experienced attorneys would have additional time to help. And so they both have been working on the COVID-19 specific information that Jack referenced, but also just making sure that we have updated all of our content because our websites are so incredibly popular. And we began working with the other legal aid providers in Maine on collaborations to make sure that we were coordinating the different areas of law that we are emphasizing and the resources that we can provide to people. We know in Maine that people living in rural areas have limited broadband and limited computer access. So we made the decision to put newspaper ads in local papers around the state, especially those used by folks in rural Maine, so that people would know what kinds of problems Pine Tree handles and how to contact us with the local phone numbers. Those ads began running this month all over the state. We have a wonderful pro bono team. They began reaching out to other states to think about how we could use volunteers, especially anticipating the volume of demand that's going to exist when the courts do reopen, but also thinking about how we can use them now and how we can support them even if we're not physically able to be in the same location with those volunteers if there's a continued work from home situation in play. Our managers began thinking about how things will be different in different parts of the state. There's obviously a much higher volume of COVID-19 cases in southern Maine than there is in Aroostook County. And we want to be sure that we are adapting our services to meet needs all over the state because we have 6 office locations. An unexpected development, we had 2 fellowship attorneys who were both third-year law students in out-of-state law schools who were selected for their fellowships last November, actually. We found out on May 4th that all of the seats for the Maine bar exam had been filled, which means that both of these attorneys have to find other places to take the bar exam. Fortunately, they can work at Pine Tree in Maine under a special bar rule, but we've been working with them to make sure that they were going to be able to take a bar exam coming up this fall. Our Justice Action Group has been in place for quite a while to support the work of civil legal aid, and Charlie Dingman, who is the chair of the legislative group, just finished submitting a request on behalf of all of the civil legal aid providers to the state, to the governor's office, for increased funding support for all of our work, including Pine Tree, although we haven't heard anything yet about that. And I've begun working on a return to work plan. I don't exactly know when that will take effect, but the governor's suggested timeline for phase 2 in June does talk about legal services being one of the services that might be part of phase 2. So I've been looking at OSHA and CDC recommendations to make sure that when we do reopen, that we do so safely. The challenges include working away from the office is hard. I find it really hard. And unlike half of our staff, I don't have small children at home because of school-related closures. Some of our other staff have older parents that they're providing care for or support. And we have some staff that are at higher risk for various reasons, and we need to ensure their safety. As everybody's mentioned, it's really unclear when and how things are going to change within the court system. Pine Tree litigates more cases in more areas of law in state court than any other law firm in the state that I'm aware of. And it's very difficult to plan for the future without understanding when and how the courts will resume operations. So as folks have mentioned, we're anticipating, but we're going to have to adjust really quickly once the courts come out with some new information. And I would say that even after 2 months struggling to balance routine work and the unique demands and challenges specific to COVID-19 is really hard, both for our advocates and for our wonderful administrative staff. On the other hand, we have some advantages. We were an early adopter of technology at Pine Tree, and that has made this transition easier for our staff. We moved last year to strengthen and create a statewide manager team with strong support from our deputy director. And that has helped ensure that we're taking a program-wide approach to local legal work and staff supervision, ongoing communication, and program-wide goals. And then finally, I would say that we adopted in 2013 a core value statement. And 3 of those core values are particularly important at this moment in time: shared ownership, sustainability, and optimism. And I think that I know is helping me stay focused. Over the past 53 years, Pine Tree's been in operation. It has had to adapt to changes in lots of different ways. And I think that experience is standing us in good stead right now. We are also lucky to have wonderful colleagues in the legal aid community and in the law firm community in Maine and around the country. And everybody is being incredibly generous and sharing ideas on how to proceed, what to do, and how to make our services really accessible for the people who need them. I think we know that what we do in June is probably going to look different than what we do later in the summer or the fall. And we will be continuing to depend on those colleagues and allies around the country to provide guidance and best practices. One of the things I worry about, and I know other our colleagues worry about, is that Pine Tree has never had enough resources to say yes to everybody who needs our help. But saying no is hard, and saying no is particularly hard at this moment in time. But we know that we are going to say no to even more people just because of increased demand and the increased number of people that are eligible for our services. And that's going to be a challenge for all of us. Finally, I would say our top asset, not surprisingly, is our staff, especially our frontline case handlers. They have just an extraordinary commitment to justice for the people of Maine who need our help. And our responsibility as program leaders and as a board is to ensure their safety and their ability to be with us for the long run.
Great. Thank you so much, Nan. That was wonderful to hear. So I think we'll open it up to questions. And so there's one question already in the chat, and Maureen, maybe this is something that you could answer. The question is there any sense as to the amount of need in rural areas compared to the larger population centers?
Sure. You know, I think the differences in need in civil legal needs in the rural areas and the more urban areas of Maine is something that we talk a lot about at Pine Tree, because as most people who are familiar at all with Maine know that there can be really significant differences in the needs. In the city of Portland, there's a lot more services available in terms of social services, medical services that are right downtown and more accessible to clients, which is more of a challenge for our clients that live in more rural areas. Also the, one major thing that we run into at Pine Tree is with general assistance cases that the city of Portland has a very specific process by which people can apply for general assistance. And there are rural towns in Maine that are also required to have general assistance programs that have no process. And when you ask them to apply for general assistance, they say, what do you mean, what's general assistance? And so it's something that we think about a lot. I mean, I just quickly, I saw the question a few minutes ago, and so I was looking at our case numbers. It looks like sort of the ratio of calls that we're getting this year during this time from the rural areas and the urban areas are the same. So we're seeing this sort of the same proportion. But I would note that probably the biggest area that we're thinking about that's a specific need for people in rural areas is what's going to happen when the courts reopen more in terms of access to the court system. We all know that the cell phone service and availability of internet and in our more rural areas is not as good as it is in our urban areas, which will present challenges to how people are able to access our court system. If the court is going to have more remote video and phone hearings, which is what is happening now and is what is being talked about more. And actually, as we speak, the law court is hosting a public forum about this very issue. So it's something that's definitely on our radar.
Great. Thank you so much, Maureen. We've got time for a few additional questions. If anyone has something that they want to ask, go ahead and put it into the chat. And if you had a question that you had asked before that we didn't answer, please do let us know. We really appreciate it. Great, and thank you, Jen, for your comment. We really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, while people are entering into the chat, we have put everyone who registered, we put their names into a little vase for Coffee by Design prize. So I will go ahead and do the raffle now, and then if there are no other questions, we can let everyone get to their lunch. So here we go. I've just got just shovel them up here, and let's see. Okay. So our winner is Donald Fontaine, who is a former Pine Tree Executive Director, as it happens. So congratulations, Don, and I will follow up with you by email, and we'll arrange to have Coffee by Design send you some coffee. And I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I think we'll leave it at that. Oh, actually, that's right. Just before we go, we had one final poll question. We are hoping you'll let us know what topics you'd be interested in focusing on in future events like this. So if you want to go ahead, Nicole, if you could share that poll, people can fill it out. And if you enjoyed this presentation and want to see something in the future on a different topic where we can really dive in, please do let us know, and we'll arrange further events like these. Thank you. Oh, lots of great responses. Thank you. And as you can see on the screen now, there are plenty of ways to help. So if you can go onto our website or Twitter or Facebook and share some of the COVID-19 resources, we could really use your help getting that out into the community. Share them with friends, family, neighbors, your client populations. We would really appreciate that. For Maine attorneys looking to help, you can, of course, reach out to us about pro bono opportunities. We are thinking with our staff about what the big needs are going to be. We know our staff aren't going to be able to respond on our own in the coming months. And so we'll be relying on pro bono attorneys, as always, to help us with that. And of course, there's the Campaign for Justice, which we hope Maine attorneys will continue to support, although we know these are really uncertain times. And then, of course, we always encourage donations to Pine Tree as well. All right, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope everyone stays healthy and well, and we hope to see you at a future event like this.